there, thanks for joining me today. This is Laura Lynn with Keep Inking Up. I'm an independent demonstrator for Stampin' Up! In San Antonio, Texas. And did you know that July is World Watercoloring Month? I just found out. I don't know how I missed it, but I just found out. So watercoloring is a wonderful way to color our images and backgrounds. I will say up front that I am not an expert in watercoloring whatsoever, but I thought that I would go ahead and share some tips about watercoloring today since it is World Watercoloring Month. So this is a card that I've made recently, and I watercolored the hippo. This hippo is from the Hippos, which is a free celebration choice with a $50 order. And look at these cute little glasses. Those are from the hippo dies that are another free item. So I watercolored the hippo with 2 different colors, and then you can also see in the background I did a watercolor wash on this layer behind the hippo. So this is just so cute. So I wanted to share a couple of tips about basic beginning watercoloring. Like I said, I am definitely a beginner. I am not an expert in any way, shape, or form, but I do want to share a couple of tips that I've been learning over the past several years on how to watercolor. So if you are an expert watercolor artist and I say something that is just completely wrong, or you have some additional tips, I would love it if you would share your information, your knowledge in the comments below so I can learn as well as anyone else who's watching. So the first thing that I want to say is when watercoloring, you want to use watercolor paper. Now, Stampin' Up! Does carry our Fluid 100 watercolor paper, and that is what we are going to watercolor on today. It is very important to use any kind of a paper that can handle a lot of water. You don't want to use cardstock because if you do, the water will kind of break down the fibers in the cardstock and you won't get a good effect. It'll kind of pill up and you won't be able to move the color around like you intend to, and you'll just get frustrated. So number 1 tip is to use watercolor paper. Now if you're going to be stamping images onto watercolor paper, you'll need to use black Stazon ink or any kind of permanent watercolor ink. This is what we happen to carry, and so that's what I use. And I have already ahead of time stamped one of the cute hippos from the Hippos onto a piece of the watercolor paper. I'm going to try to hold this up so you can see there's a lot of texture on watercolor paper, and that helps it kind of absorb the water a little bit and make it run really nicely on there. So actually what I did with the Stazon ink is I used my Stamparatus so that I could stamp it multiple times so I could get a nice crisp image and make sure that I went in on all of those grooves of the watercolor paper. I hope that makes sense. But if you don't use the Stamparatus and you just use a block, which you can do, you might not get enough pressure to go into the crevices of the watercolor paper. So I'm going to set that down. I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little bit to this little hippo here so you'll be able to see what I'm actually doing. To watercolor, I'm going to use our water painters. Our water painters comes in a set of 3. We have this really fun wide brush. Let me pull this out here like that. And you can see that. And I used this wide brush on when I made the background. Ooh, that's close. When I did the watercolor wash. So when you're using large areas, you want to use the wide brush. It also has a medium brush, which, take off the lid of that. That's a medium-sized brush. And I am actually going to use the small brush. I just like to use the more detailed point of that, especially with these small images. Okay, so I have that. Now our water brushes are nice because they have water built into the handle of the brush, and you can see this push. And what you can do, I'm going to pull in a rag here. When you push on the barrel of the painter, water will come out through the the brush nib, I guess you call it. So that's great. But even though I have that option, I do have a cup of water here. Oh, that's so close. A cup of water here because I just feel like it's faster. I'm very impatient, so I like to dip, and so I'll dip off screen into that cup of water. I just think that it does a faster job of cleaning my brush as I go, and if I need to add more water. So to actually paint, what I'm going to use is the classic ink pad. I'm going to use basic gray today for this hippo. Now a lot of people will just squeeze the lid to get ink on the inside of the lid, and you can do that. I don't like to do it. I don't like that mess. What I do instead is I take a clear block, and I just stick it on there. And now I've got plenty of ink on my clear block as a palette. So I'm gonna go ahead and close that up. You can also use a drop of re-inker, and I do that especially with lighter colors of ink. I'll use the basic gray is a pretty dark color, so I'm not gonna use the refill today. But if I were using a light color like pale papaya or something, I'll usually put a drop of the re-inker on the clear block instead, because that way I get a little bit more intense color, and that's what I need for lighter colors. So I'm gonna keep my rag here, and I'm going to get my brush wet, and then I'm going to pick up a little of this gray and then just do a wash over, oh, that's dark, a wash over. I did a little bit too much. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna set that aside and do that another time, and I'm gonna try again. So actually I did what I didn't want to do. First, I actually want to add clear water. So I'm dipping into my, my clear water, and I'm just gonna go over my hippo. And because I have the Stazon ink, none of the ink of the image is running at all. And I'm just wetting the whole image. And this is just kind of preparing the paper for the ink. And I should have done that before, and I didn't, and that's why I got that big blob. But I think that looks good. So now I'll add a little bit of the gray. Oh, let's see, that much better. And I'm just adding a little bit of gray. And I'm going to add kind of like a light wash all over the hippo. And because I added that water ahead of time, it's kind of receiving that ink a little easier and nicer. So I'm just adding just a light wash of color. I'm just going to pick up ink when I need it, when I feel like I'm drying out on my brush. Okay, doesn't have to be perfect. One of the nicest things about watercolor is you kind of do want to leave a little bit of white space here and there. It just kind of adds to the effect. So I've put a layer of gray around the whole hippo, and now I'm going to clean my brush, but I'm going to add a little bit darker on the face and the body, because I want to differentiate the face from the snout and the belly. So I'm just picking up ink again from my block and adding it to the legs, arms, and just not the belly and not the snout, because I want there to be two colors for my hippo. And what's really nice about watercolor is you can just keep adding layers of color, however much or however little that you want. You can keep adding color, but you can't really take it away. You can dab a little bit. If you use clear water, you might be able to pick up a little bit of color sometimes, but that's really, really challenging and difficult. So what's nice is you can just keep adding layers of color. So I hope that you get that, so you can see how the snout and the belly are light because I didn't add color there. And that's basically what I wanted to share with you, is how you can add some watercolor and make an adorable little colored image. So a couple of the tips: use watercolor paper, use Stazon ink for stamped images, put your block in the ink pad to create an ink palette, have a rag handy to clean off your brush. These water painters are really wonderful, but also use a cup of water handy to clean your brush while you're using it. And then you can cut out your image and put it on a project. I have been playing a little bit, so I wanted to share some of the other images, the other hippos that I've painted. So here's some other gray ones, very similar, and this will dry a little bit lighter than that is. And you can see that I did the same thing. I did the gray, and they're all a little bit different. Every time you do watercoloring, it's a little bit different. These two I did with crumb cake ink, and this one I did both the crumb cake and the basic gray. And that's what I did on my sample that I shared with you earlier with the basic. Oh, there it is. So let me go ahead and zoom back out. Well, if I can. There we go. So zoom back out. So this hippo did the crumb cake and the basic gray like this one. And again, this one's even more different. So it looks so different without the glasses too. The glasses make a big difference. So I hope you learned some tips about watercoloring, and since July is World Watercoloring Month, I hope that you give watercoloring a try. And again, if I gave any misinformation and you know more about watercoloring, I would really appreciate it if you would leave a comment below and let me know so I can learn, because I'm clearly just a beginner in all this, but it's so much fun and I love how the images come out. So thanks again so much for watching me today. Any links to the products that I've used will be in the description box below. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.